Vamos a reanudar otra vez. Por favor, tomad asiento, guardad silencio. Tengo que felicitaros porque en lo que llevamos del Congreso, al menos desde el escenario, no se ha oído ni una sola vez un teléfono. Teléfonos en modo de pausa, de silencio, y un par de avisos para no faltar a la costumbre. Me dice la organización que en el mostrador de acreditaciones está la maleta de David Jones, o por lo menos pone David Jones porque la organización es muy prolijita y ha abierto la maleta, ha visto el nombre del sujeto, ha comprobado que tiene ropa de caballero y la maleta es gris y roja, David Jones. Y después también en acreditaciones hay un teléfono móvil HTC que alguien se ha olvidado por ahí y antes de recogerlo va a haber que describir el teléfono. He hecho algo que probablemente esté mal, bueno, varias cosas seguro, pero una que está mal, por lo que me habéis dicho algunos de vosotros que me preguntáis por ahí, que es no presentarme a mí mismo. Bueno, me parecía que era innecesario, pero ya que me lo han dicho, rápidamente os cuento. Yo me llamo Arturo Merallo, he estado 25 años en la universidad, en la Facultad de Comunicación, soy catedrático de radio, me dedico a la formación empresarial. Mis ámbitos de especialización son la comunicación interpersonal, cara a cara, la oratoria, la comunicación en los medios y la inteligencia emocional. Desde hace mucho tiempo, bastante tiempo, conozco y trabajo con escuelas católicas en distintas cosas relacionadas con la comunicación. Es una institución que tiene sus defectos, porque no está constituida por ángeles, sino por personas, y por tanto tiene que tener sus defectos. Pero yo estoy convencido que es una institución que presta un impagable servicio. Y entonces trabajo no solo con gusto, con escuelas católicas, sino que me considero miembro del club de fans. Yo no soy religioso ni sacerdote, estoy casado y tengo 2 niños, pero eso no me impide ser miembro del club de fans, supongo. Bien, y dicho esto, voy a presentar a Christopher Day. El ponente que viene a continuación viene desde Gran Bretaña. Christopher Day es un profesor de educación, codirector del Centro de Investigación y profesor de liderazgo. Es decir, su ámbito de especialización es el desarrollo permanente del personal docente, algo que ha salido ya muchas veces aquí. Él nos va a dar algunas pistas de cómo motivarle. La efectividad del maestro, la vida de los docentes y su trabajo. Y, por tanto, cómo desarrollar el liderazgo escolar exitoso. Esto a lo que Montserrat Pozo comentaba antes de la importancia de los recursos humanos, el profesor como el gran recurso. Christopher Day es miembro del Consejo de Administración en el Consejo Internacional de Educación de Maestros, es el editor de Docentes y Enseñanza, es también coeditor de otra publicación de las revistas de investigación educativa de Acción Internacional. Ahora mismo está trabajando en un proyecto de investigación en 9 países donde se analiza el liderazgo escolar de las escuelas exitosas. ¿Por qué esas escuelas son tan exitosas, concretamente en contextos urbanos? Está trabajando en un proyecto nacional en Gran Bretaña sobre liderazgo escolar y en otro sobre enseñanza eficaz. Tiene muchísimos libros y publicaciones, destacaré solo algunos. Teachers Matter es uno de los títulos, Dirección escolar con éxito, perspectivas internacionales es otro, o Liderazgo efectivo para la mejora escolar. Es profesor adjunto de la Universidad de China de Hong Kong y profesor visitante en la Universidad in Holland, en los Países Bajos. Ha recibido el doctor honoris causa en la Universidad de Linköping en Suecia en el año 93. Su ponencia se titula Transformación y mejora continua en el aprendizaje en los tiempos de cambio. Lo que va a explicarnos es cómo los directores de los centros de éxito consiguen trabajar en diferentes países para gestionar bien el cambio y la innovación. Para esto se ha apoyado en 3 estudios. Un estudio hecho en 12 países con 60 directivos de centros, escuelas primarias y secundarias punteras. Otro segundo estudio de la OCDE, un informe sobre la mejora del liderazgo escolar. Y un tercer estudio de impacto sobre la influencia de los directores en las escuelas efectivas en Gran Bretaña. Con esos 3 estudios nos va a dar algunas pistas. Una de las conclusiones es: los directores de las escuelas con éxito poseen similares valores y atributos en los distintos países, pero usan diferentes combinaciones y estrategias para adaptarse a la realidad. Y esto tiene implicaciones, al menos en 3 cosas: la selección del profesorado, la formación y su desarrollo profesional. Todas estas cuestiones son absolutamente nucleares en nuestros centros. Antes de que Christopher Day suba al escenario, veamos el vídeo que nos han preparado. Para seguir reflexionando sobre cómo mejorar nuestros centros, pido que suba al escenario Christopher Day. Un aplauso, por favor. When you want.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, what an introduction. And probably the only way now is down after that. I'm really, really pleased to be here, and I want to thank the organizing committee for their kind invitation. And immediately, before I begin, really, I think the one thing you didn't say about me is that I always wanted to be a teacher. I trained as a teacher. I taught in schools, and I still love teaching in schools when I can get into those schools. And so, from that, you will understand, I hope, that I have a passion for what I do. And what I do, I hope, is to help teachers, to help head teachers, to help school owners, I think there are school owners here as well, to think differently about what they do. And maybe through some of what I say and some of the research which I report and which I and my colleagues have carried out, maybe to influence you just a small amount this afternoon. And I have one apology to make. My apology is to all those of you who live in the south of Spain. I know you should be having your siestas now, so I apologize for that. But I hope that what I have to say will at least keep you awake. And I ask those of you who do not live in the south of Spain, if you see anybody near you who comes from the south of Spain, beginning to close their eyes, just give them a nudge. Just give them a nudge. Okay. I cannot possibly hope to emulate Mark Prensky. I cannot say more than buenos dias. This is the only words I have in Spanish. So forgive me for that. Mark gave an excellent, educative, and very entertaining speech this morning. I think you'll agree. And in the speech, it reminded me of what sometimes is the huge gap between what we want for our children, what we want for our teachers, what we want for our schools, and the challenges of change which achieving what we want make us face. And what I hope everyone here will believe, and I hope everyone here will continue to believe, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the financial crisis which is gripping the Western world at the moment, regardless of some of the disaffected and alienated children and young people in our schools, regardless of some of the disadvantaged and dysfunctional families from which they come. I hope that, like me, you and your staff and your teachers will always work with the hope that you can make things better for them and with them, and that hope never dies. And you know, the one thing that we know about leadership is that leaders are, above all others in the school, charged with the responsibility to hope, to be optimistic, not to be cynical, not to be pessimistic, to remain passionate despite the highs and the lows of the lives that happen in the school and around the school. And I was aware as I was preparing for this small talk that you and others in the Catholic schools in Spain are responsible, I could not believe this, you're responsible for the education of 1.5 million secondary school children and 750,000 primary school children. What a responsibility. And I came this morning here at 9 o'clock and to witness, as I've witnessed before, and to participate, as I have participated before, in the wonderful beginning that you have to your day, when you're reminded of your values, you're reminded of the values of Catholic education, you're reminded of the life values, you're asked to reflect. It's a wonderful way to begin the day. And sometimes when I work with and talk to head teachers and others in state schools, in government schools, in various countries, they don't have this. They don't have this very powerful value system. And so I congratulate you on that value system and wish you well. And I'll be saying a little more about this in what I have to say today. So, I suppose what I'm suggesting, before I begin the formal part of this sharing of knowledge, from international knowledge really, about effective and successful school leaders, is, I suppose what I'm reminding myself and you is that leadership is not enough. Being a head teacher is not enough. Being a teacher in a classroom is not enough. It's not enough to have your body there. You have, as Tom Sergiovanni, an American writer on leadership, has written many times, you have to be in the room with your head, with your hand, and of course, with your heart. And if you're there with your head and your hand and your heart, then you'll be more likely to touch people. Then you'll be more likely to be able to teach to your best. Then you'll be able to be more likely to influence those whom you wish to influence with your heart, your head, and your hand. And over lunchtime, this long lunch you have in Spain, it's wonderful. Over lunchtime, we were talking about the importance of the heart and the head and the hand, and how sometimes the biggest challenge is to engage those teachers in your schools who have forgotten about their hearts, who may have forgotten why they came in to teaching in the first place. Maybe they have good reasons. To win back the hearts of those teachers whose energy is falling. Maybe it's because we're getting older. Maybe it's because the new challenges are too difficult for us, because we have other challenges in other parts of our lives. But to win those people back. And somebody asked me, what would be your perfect school? What would be, and you think about this, what would be your perfect school? And my answer to that was, I don't have a perfect school. But I have a school in my mind in which all people are striving to do the best they can for the children and young people they teach. In which there is disagreement but harmony within that disagreement in the staff room. And in which the head teacher in that school spends a very small amount of time in their office and a very large amount of time in the corridors and the classrooms and the staff rooms of the school, and indeed in the community around the school. Do you agree? Good, good. Because if you don't agree, I'm afraid you're going to have to come back at the end. Okay. So what I will be doing in the time I have, is to draw upon a range of international research. That's international comparative research on successful school leadership, and research in different countries also on successful school leadership. All of which is designed to find out how we might improve all aspects, not just one aspect, but all aspects of our work in schools. And there are 5 key questions which I'm going to address. Here. You can see them, I hope, in front of you now. What do we know about how teacher quality affects student or pupil outcomes? What do we know about what head teachers do to achieve success? You know, when I was asked to come here, I was asked to focus on pedagogical leadership. This is an important issue, I know, for everybody in this room. And as I began to prepare, using my own and other people's research, I realized, of course, that you cannot lead a school successfully only by exercising pedagogical leadership, only by focusing directly on teaching and learning in classrooms. That's what pedagogical leadership is. You must, in doing that, also exercise what is called transformational leadership. And so I'm going to talk about both of those things in relation to successful school leadership. And the third question, how do successful leaders influence the improvement of pupil outcomes? Really, really difficult question, because there's a long line between the principal and the pupil in the classrooms. And we all know that the direct influence must come from the teacher in that classroom. It's the teacher who, by understanding the world of the child, appreciating the world of the child, is able to access that world, whether through digital technology or through the head, the heart, and the hand, or both, preferably, in order to challenge and support that each of those children in his or her classroom to learn, to love learning, to grow to love learning, as well as to achieve to their best. And the fourth question, one which you will be very familiar with in this hall. Is successful leadership a moral practice? And finally then, what is it in leading the learning that head teachers do? So I do hope that that will interest you, keep you awake, even those who should be on siesta. Now, change is a word which has been used a lot. I know it was used this morning, and it's always associated with leadership, whether it's in the classroom or in the school. And change is an easy word to say, but it's a difficult word to enact. You think of the times when you have been challenged to change, either in your professional or your personal life. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's quite difficult and you need support. Change usually requires extra energy and extra effort. It also usually involves the loss of something, maybe the loss of something, of a practice you used to carry out in your classroom if you were a teacher. In some cases, it's a threat to professional sense of identity. And so the first observation which to be made is that to be engaged in change, to be involved in change, requires both courage, this word that was used earlier today, as well as the passion, and it also, however, requires what I will call resilience. You have to be resilient to be involved in change. For those of you who've been working in schools for many years, just think of the number of changes which have affected the schools in which you have worked. Think of the number of times you have had to adapt to those changes in order to help to improve the school. It's no wonder that teachers are tired on a Friday afternoon. It's no wonder that they're tired at the end of a long term. It's not surprising. Uh-oh, I've spotted my first yawn in the room. You know, I look for yawns. Oh, like this. Of course, I won't point to the person who yawned, but it's somebody in this section. Somebody in this section. Okay. Let's move along. The reason that is recorded, and you will have experienced, that being involved in change and being involved in leadership of change is so difficult, and particularly in recent years, is because governments seem not to trust educators in schools as much as they once did. Is it the same in Spain? In your country? Does the government trust you to get on with your work without checking up on you? No? No. Okay. Is it the same for you? No or yes? Huh? I'm hard of hearing, so I have to ask you this. Yeah. Okay. So, and it's the same in most countries of the world now. So you have more bureaucratic procedures to conduct. We have in our country, in England, performance management of teachers every year. It's an interview, it's based on classroom observation and so on. It was called appraisal, now it's called performance management. We have every year a school improvement plan that the school has to create, and that's monitored. We have an external inspection system. Now, this is England, but the pattern of lack of trust or diminishing trust seems to be repeated in different countries across the world. And it's these kind of changes which are driving the work of head teachers and driving the work of schools. Look, for example, at some examples of changing work contexts for schools. I'll talk a little bit about PISA in a moment or two, but you know that many countries, certainly more than 40 countries, are now comparing themselves with each other in relation to a relatively narrow band of student attainment through the PISA. 2009 was the last one, and some of you may know the results for Spanish pupils. If you don't, I'm going to remind you. And governments now take notice of these. They want to be top of the league. They, like a football team, they want to climb higher and higher and higher. And often they pass on these pressures to the schools in different ways. So you have here an emphasis on raising academic standards, but at the same time, you have an emphasis on more community engagement, more responsibilities for head teachers. And the big words are more change, more work. This is not to be pessimistic. This is simply to state it as it is. Now, of course, in different countries, the pace of change varies. In some, it's slower, some, it's faster. But change is a certainty. Here's an example from the work of a head teacher in England. He said, "I would reckon I work 15 or 16 hours every day. The list of duties is frightening. Meetings with staff, parents, builders, governors, psychologists, social workers, and many others. Assemblies, meetings of the whole school, run every day in 2 different buildings. Budgets and targets to set and manage. Furniture to choose for classrooms, caterers to handle, staff to hire, fire, and reviews. 15 to 16 hours a day. It's too much. It's too much, even for the most resilient." One of the consequences of changes in the complexity, or should I say, increases in the complexity of head teachers' work, is that they cannot do it alone anymore. You cannot be the hero or the heroine in your own school as a head teacher. You must, even if you didn't do so before, share the burden or the joys or the challenges of leadership. This means, of course, building capacity for leadership among others, building trust, more complexity, more meetings, and so on, simply in order to keep on improving the school. In the olden days, many years ago, there used to be a distinction between managing a school and leading a school. And people used to ask, is he a good leader? Is she a good manager? And so on and so forth. These days, of course, you have to be both good at managing the school and good at leading the school. You can see that on the left-hand side, there are the leading or leadership concerns, the vision, the strategic issues, transformation, the ends, where are we going in this school, determining those, the people, and doing the right thing. And on the right-hand side, the management or managing concerns, which are, of course, to keep the business ticking over, to make sure it runs smoothly and efficiently, or as efficiently as possible. Now, I've begun with this rather a thumbnail sketch of the context and the new context of leadership, simply in order to locate your current work, to enable you to step back and say, yes, I think I am doing more than I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I think I must do something about making sure that I'm healthy enough, that I'm committed enough, and that I have the time in order to continue to respond positively and constructively to largely external requests or demands for change. One of those demands for change, as I've already mentioned, comes from the governments who value the results in PISA, the international, if you like, the international arm measuring results in reading, maths, and science for OECD. And so I want to just begin with that rather narrow but important definition of quality, just to remind us that, of course, we're not there simply to make our schools happy, with happy children, happy young people, and happy staff. We're there also to help them achieve to the best of their ability so that wherever possible in these times, they're able to gain employment, because employment, of course, will give them the opportunity to live richer lives. So what do we know about how teacher quality affects pupil outcomes? Well, here's a quote, really based on an American economist, educational economist called Hanashek, who looks at large samples of pupil results and tries to work out why these results have happened. And he estimates, among others, there are others who do similar research, that the students of a very bad teacher learn, on average, only half a year's work. Only half a year's work if they have a very bad teacher. The students in the class of a very good teacher will learn 1.5 years' worth of work. That difference amounts to a year's worth of learning in a single year. And there are figures which show that over a 3-year period, the divide between the children's achievement who've been taught by a good teacher and those who've been taught by a poor teacher grows. So, and we all know this. So it's so important in schools that whole school standards are established, so teachers know what the baseline is for good teaching, etc. This is a New Zealander, also a quantitative researcher, says something very similar. Having poor teachers can be devastating. The least effective teachers elicited average student gains of roughly 14 percentile points a year, whereas the most effective 52 percentile points a year. Again, this huge gap. So the question for all of us in this room is, whether we're head teachers, owners, or teachers, or even teacher educators, what are we doing to help teachers to make sure that teachers are able, have the capacity to, as well as the knowledge and competencies to, teach to their best in different circumstances? The results I said I promised to give you for Spain, in case you've forgotten them, for OECD, are that Spain is statistically below the average for OECD countries. It's 34th out of 42 member states in terms of that narrow band of attainment. Its average reading score is 26th out of 34. Boys, as you will know, perform less well than girls. Actually, girls are higher than the OECD average. Now, the most important observation is that in terms of change in reading performance between the year 2000 and 2009, Spain is 33rd out of 38 countries. In other words, there has actually been a decline in boys' reading and a decline in girls' reading in Spain in the last 9 years. And the question is why? I don't know the answer to that question. The question is also, is it important? I suspect it is important to all of you, and certainly is to me. So, the message from this kind of research, this very large-scale quantitative, rather narrowly focused research, but important research, is that governments around the world are intervening in schools to set new, higher standards for teaching and learning. Many, not perhaps your government, but I know your congregation do, many propose a similar range of approaches which teachers should be able to use. For example, here's what the Scottish government suggests. Teachers need to promote active learning approaches, promote choice in learning and learning approaches. And I know you heard just before lunchtime about some of those innovative approaches in learning and in teaching and in facilitating how to learn. to encourage pupils to participate, to explain their thinking, to support pupils in making connections and transferring their learning to new situations, making the learning relevant, not just to the present of the pupil, but also to the future life of that pupil through its application, and so on. And apply formative assessment processes to help pupils to self-monitor their learning and set new learning goals. All of these important. And of course, implications about new teaching approaches mean for teachers they have to learn new things, some of them they have to change. For teacher educators, they may have to start teaching their students new ways. And for all of us, as Mark Prensky said this morning, we need to be open to learning new ways of practicing our own art and our own craft, whether we're owners, whether we're head teachers, whether we're teachers or teacher educators. Learning never stops. Actually, that's what keeps me feeling passionate about doing what I do. There's always something more to learn. And if you have a good head teacher, and if you have a good owner, they're always saying to you, isn't it time we moved on from here? Even though we might be very good right now, we still need to move on, move further. What do we know about what head teachers do to achieve success? And here I'll focus just for a few moments on transformational and pedagogical leadership. Teachers can no longer live in cultures of classroom privacy. I don't know what happens in your schools, but if teachers, once they close the door, inhabit their own kingdoms, then maybe that's not good practice. Maybe the doors should be open more. Maybe there should be more sharing with other teachers. Maybe there should be more sharing with other teachers in other schools. So the culture of privacy, which has existed for so long in many schools, must go. This is what research is telling us. It isn't there in good schools. It isn't there in schools with effective leadership. There are open conversations about teaching and learning. Nobody is defensive about what they did or what they did not do. Similarly, equity. You know, the right of every student to be treated fairly. The right of every student to be entitled to attention to their needs from every teacher cannot be left anymore to the discretion of individual teachers. All teachers need to be aware of principles of fairness and equity. And sometimes you don't know when you're being unfair unless you're engaged in some systematic reflection. Maybe somebody comes in and uses one of the tools we heard about this morning to video. You ask them in. You don't force your way. You ask them in. You say, well, I noticed that you were speaking more to this part of the room than this part of the room. Or I noticed more that you were spending more time with this small group than you were with this small group. Why was that? Or you didn't talk at all to this individual for 30 minutes. Why? Or why did that other individual never ask a question in the whole of the time he was or she was with you in that lesson? There must be reasons for these things, reasons to improve, reasons to ensure not just high-quality teaching, but teaching with equity. Now, the argument is, and research certainly shows, that there are many variables, of course, which affect the way children and young people learn in schools. Many. However, there is really only one person in the school who is able to create a synergy to enable at least some of those variables to be controlled, to be positively put together in order for improvements in teaching. And you can see that in this quote from a very large American study on school districts and schools, that educators in leadership positions are uniquely well positioned to ensure the necessary synergy. How do you teach synergy. What training and development programs exist called synergy in leadership? It's hard. It's like passion. How do you teach passion? How do you teach commitment? How do you teach resilience? And yet, all of these, together with synergy, are essential aspects identified through experience and through research of effective school leaders. Only through understandings of every aspect of school can head teachers build whole school synergy. Viviane Robinson and her colleagues in New Zealand conducted a very large-scale meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is bringing together a number of existing research reports, empirical research reports on effective school leadership. And there are a couple of items from their very large report, which is downloadable from the New Zealand Ministry of Education website. It's free. It's a very large and very authoritative report. But a couple particularly of observations which resonate with many other pieces of research which have been and are currently being carried out. The first one is that effective leaders engage in collective responsibility. They distribute the leadership. They don't hold it all to themselves. The second one, and I'll talk more about this in a few moments, the second one is that of all the important dimensions that are characteristic of effective head teachers' work, the single most important one is participating in and encouraging others to participate in continuing professional development. Imagine, that's the most important. So if you as a head teacher are not placing your energies, a great deal of your energies, on promoting continuing professional development of different kinds, informal kinds, the mentoring, the shared observation, the peer observation, the visiting other schools, the individual reading, for that matter, staff meetings which aren't always about bureaucracy, staff meetings which are about development in some way. Not all of them, but some of them. If you're not encouraging that openness, that learning, and that reflexivity, self-reflection among your staff, then it seems that you may not be as effective as otherwise you could be. And certainly this is what the literature tells us. Now, I'm going to share a little bit about a 3-year research project which I was involved in with colleagues in England, which took account of a range of international research, but also was able to build on it. What we did is first of all, we selected our schools nationally, national sample, based upon these criteria. First of all, the school had to have improved over at least a 3-year consecutive period under the leadership of the same head teacher. Had to have improved over at least a 3-year consecutive period under the leadership of the same head teacher. We then went into those, in terms of its pupil outcomes, measurable outcomes. We then went into those schools and we asked, why? What is the leader doing? We talked to teachers in the school, we talked to students in the school, we talked to parents, we talked to board or members or governors, we would call them, as well as talking with the head teacher. And at the end of the day, at the end of this period, these are what we found to be the 8 key dimensions. But this is only part 1 of the story. 8 key dimensions of effective, successful school leadership. Now, I hope you'll be looking at some of these words and saying to yourself, yes, that's what I do. Yes, that's what we do. Oh, well, I'm not sure about that, and so on. But what you can see in looking around those circles with, of course, pupil well-being and achievement in the middle, you can see that improving conditions for teaching and learning is so important. That redesigning and enriching the curriculum, as some of you I know have done in recent years, is an important feature. Sometimes you have to, and you heard this morning, restructure the organization so that it's better suited to today and tomorrow's learning needs. Enhancing teacher quality and planning for the day when you as head teacher will no longer be there, so that others may take up the role. Building relationships outside the school community as well as building relationships inside the school community, and of course the pedagogical leadership enhancing the teaching and learning. Now, I said this is part one only, and it is part one only because, of course, head teachers don't do all of these things in the same way all of the time. You'd have to be a superhero or heroine, yeah, in order to do that. So the second thing we learned from that, which won't surprise you as experienced head teachers, the second thing we learned was that head teachers improve their schools over time by the accumulation and application of improvement strategies which are context sensitive. By the accumulation and application of improvement strategies which are sensitive to the context of the school. You can't do everything all the time. And what these successful head teachers do, like the layers of a cake, they build upon each strategy. But as they build upon each strategy, they don't abandon or leave behind the other strategies. No. It simply means that they need to spend less time on the earlier strategies as they place emphasis on the later strategies. And so it's an accumulation over time. Just think about the word trust. Think about the word trust in your own lives. When you meet someone, do you immediately say, I trust you? And does he or she immediately say, good, I trust you too? I don't think so. I don't think so. Trust takes time to build. Trust is usually built upon experience. Can I be trusted? Well, I can be trusted if I make promises which I keep. And these head teachers, according to their staff, had all made promises to the staff, both individually and collectively, which they had kept. And so they were able to begin to trust and to be trusted. Now, I want to move on rather quickly to what successful leaders do to head teacher standards. I don't know if you have head teacher standards in Spain. Do you have government standards for head teachers? Yes? No? No. Okay, you're lucky. Maybe you're lucky. Maybe they're going to come. Maybe in your own congregations. Maybe you should be developing head teacher standards. Think about it again from the position of the child or the young person in the school, or the parent of that child or young person in that school. Don't they all have entitlements that their head teachers as well as their teachers will work in a particular way to a particular set of standards? Should it vary from school to school, from classroom to classroom? From region to region? I don't think so. Not if we want to exercise and enact the principle of equity and social justice, which I know are at the heart of the values of your organization. So these standards were developed by our government in England. They're just a set of standards, and you can Google them. You can find the detail of them if you wish, if you're interested. But you can see what the key areas of work for head teachers in English schools are, briefly here. Shaping the future. Yes, it's about looking forward. What kind of school do we want to be that we aren't yet? Leading, learning and teaching. Again, at the heart of the business of schooling, the pedagogical leadership and the quality of what goes on in the classrooms. Developing self and working with others. It's not always easy. Sometimes, on a Friday afternoon perhaps, we don't want to develop ourselves. We'd rather sit down with a nice cup of coffee or tea, have a chat with a friend, relax. Timing is so important. Managing the organization, securing accountability. We've always been accountable as educators to parents, to our employers, to our children, and indeed to other members of our professional community. Now it's becoming more formal. There are more formal, if you like, bureaucratic measures of accountability. And of course, the final standard, strengthening community. Very important. And it won't surprise any of you to know that the most recent piece of research on what makes a big difference to children's learning is parental involvement. The involvement of parents. It's not a surprise, is it? Sometimes research just confirms what we already know. But how long is it since you talked with a parent about their involvement in his or her child's learning? And what that involvement entails, what it means? How long is it since you've been out to visit a parent in their own home? And your teachers also. So, quite important, maybe, you might consider standards. But of course, the effective head teachers don't worry about these. They're able easily to fulfill them. Always they want to go beyond the basic standards. So the third question, how do successful leaders influence improvements in pupil outcomes? Now, in relation to the transformational leadership model, this is how head teachers in one country, or successful, I should say, successful head teachers do it. You all talk about these words. You all talk about motivation. You all talk about building capacity. You all talk about improving working conditions for teachers and commitment and altering practices. You all talk about this. Well, here's some systematic research which suggests to you that if you build capacity, that will have an influence, but a stronger influence will be if you improve the working conditions. If, having built capacity, you support teachers in altering their practices, that's a very strong influence. And then working conditions, again, can be further improved. So the influence on beliefs is so important for you as a head teacher. Does that surprise you over there? No? Good. Good. Okay. So, question number 4. Huh? Huh? Oh, what's happening?
They have to change the channel.
Oh.
Channel 6.
Channel 6. Channel 6. No? I don't need to tell you, you're all successful leaders. It's okay. All right. So, leadership as a moral practice. Is leadership a moral practice? Bob Starrett, an ex-Catholic priest, as it happens, writes a lot about leadership as a moral practice. He defines moral purpose as not any old kind of learning, but a deep and broad learning that enables the child to accelerate the process of self-understanding and agency in relation to their cultural and social worlds. And he argues very forcefully, as I think you would do, for the practice of general ethics, issues around fairness, telling the truth, respect, conflict, misunderstandings, and loyalties. Now, it's much easier, it seems, for people to express their moral purpose when they individually, when they have a whole school collective moral purpose. Let me give you some. There was a meeting in China of international heads. Oh, is it again? Five. Is it okay? Okay. Shall I go back? No. All right. Here is what a group of international head teachers said in a communique as a result of a meeting in Beijing 2 years ago, and this relates to the importance of moral purposes. They said, we need to ensure that moral purpose is at the forefront of all educational debates with our parents, our students, our teachers, our partners, our policymakers, and our wider community. They define moral purpose as a compelling drive to do right for and by students, serving them through professional behaviors that raise the bar and narrow the achievement gap, and through so doing, demonstrate an intent with and to learn with and from each other as we live together in this world. So, even though we're from different cultures, even though these people are from different countries in the world, you can see immediately that they operate, that they live by the same value system in relation to their leadership of schools. Now, this chart here gives you 4 different orientations of schools as communal places. The first one, schools as impersonal organizations, and you can see that those schools right at the bottom here are efficient. So we can lead an efficient school. We don't need to focus particularly on transformational leadership or personal or interpersonal relations. And as we move over from the left to the right, we can see different kinds of schools in which the personal sometimes marginalizes the functional, or that's the task, or the task sometimes marginalizes the person. But if you look at the one on the right-hand side, it seems to us, in our empirical work, both in the International Successful School Principles Project, which deals with schools in 14 countries, and in our own English project, that schools as person-centered communities are best placed in the 21st century to provide education which is both morally and instrumentally successful. So schools which are learning communities, schools in which the organization exists to promote community. What we found was that there were 5 key themes of similarity between head teachers internationally. The first one is that they were sustaining their passionate commitment and personal accountability. The second one, they were maintaining their moral purpose and managing a number of different tensions and dilemmas. The third, they were being other-centered and focusing on learning and development. Greenfield, a leadership philosopher, really talks about servant leadership. Servant leadership. Why am I here? I'm here to serve others. Again, so close to your own value system there. The fourth one is that effective and successful head teachers seem to make not just rational investments in their school, but also emotional investments. Like teaching, head teaching is an emotional as well as a rational endeavor. And the fifth one is they emphasize, as Fielding does there, the personal and the functional, not one or the other. So the questions for those who educate or train leaders, and for leaders themselves are which belief or reality best reflects life in schools. What kind of values, qualities, strategies and skills do you need which will make it more possible for you to lead and manage in ways which are responsive to current and future challenges? And the final question, leading the learning, the pedagogical leadership. What does research tell us about what head teachers do? I'm going to quote here from someone you all know, Sister Montserrat del Pozo, who said during the lunchtime, in answer to a question I asked about challenge, her words were something like this. Maybe not exactly, but something like this. She said, "The biggest challenge for me is to change teachers' minds, to change the way they think about themselves and the work they do. To change people's minds." I would add to that, and I'm sure she would, if I asked her to talk a little bit more, it's not simply about changing teachers' minds. It is, of course, in some cases, about changing their hearts. Is that right, sister? Yes, good. Got that right. So it's emotional as well as rational work. I said a little bit earlier that Vivienne Robinson and her colleagues in New Zealand had identified 5 key dimensions of effective leadership, and that one of those, and the most important of those, was, in a way, staff development and participating in development. I'm going to put a chart here now which illustrates that for you. You can see the leadership dimensions on the left-hand side, establishing goals and experiences, strategic resourcing, planning, coordinating and evaluating teaching and the curriculum, ensuring an orderly and supportive environment. I've left number 4 out. You'll see on the right-hand side something called ES, which is effect sizes. Now, what these researchers did is they put together 11 empirical studies, quantitative studies, on leadership dimensions for effective head teachers, and then they were able to quantify the effect size, the size of the effect. The big one, the closer to 1.0 you get, the larger the effect size. Effect sizes are calculated between 0 and 1. And you can see easily the biggest effect size is when the leader not only promotes, but directly participates with teachers in formal or informal professional learning. What kind of learning should go on in schools? Well, certainly any learning should be part of a school improvement plan, you would think. Certainly there should be in-house leadership, not simply inviting experts in, though they may be part of it. Certainly preparing colleagues for leadership roles. Do you, as a matter of course, in your leadership of the school, seek to identify those people who might well move into more formal, more complicated leadership roles? And do you support them in their efforts to do that? Do you build capacity for learning and change, sustaining commitment? And in very practical terms, how much time do you make available for people to learn outside of their classroom learning experiences? And what strategies do you employ and what resources do you deploy in order to achieve those? And this is simply a list of other actions which you might take, engaging external expertise. Actually, they're actions which successful heads take. They're the ones who provided these. Ensuring teachers are engaged in the learning. Challenging problematic conversations, especially around low expectations of students. There should not be a teacher in any school, in any country, who has low expectations of any student, regardless of past performance. It's what I talked about earlier as being the hope and the optimism and the belief of educational commitment. Ensuring that opportunities are aligned with current policy and research, and involving school leaders who support the learning by setting and monitoring targets and developing the leadership of others. This means that you're intervening more, perhaps, in the privacy of the world of teachers in their own classrooms. And so, finally, training and development. What implications do the few things that I've been able to share with you have for training and development? Well, McKinsey & Company, who are a worldwide consulting company, have identified systems, whole school systems, not individual schools, and they've identified the 20 best performing, they claim, best performing school systems in the world. These are systems which are moving from poor to excellent in terms of performance. And you don't need to read the detail here to understand what this is about. It's about the role of a head teacher or the role of a school owner in assessing, in diagnosing where the school is at now, in order to begin to understand where, with others, where the school could be traveling towards. That's number one. Number two, based on your diagnosis, based on your assessment, you will, of course, adopt, adapt, modify, invent strategies in order to move that school forward in the way you believe it can be moved forward. And of course, those strategies, number three, must be adapted to the context. And I'm not just talking about the organizational context. Research would suggest that good head teachers, effective head teachers, take account of the context of the individual teacher, as well as the context of the organizational and the need of the organization, as well as the policy and community context in which the school is based, in order to move the school from poor to fair to good to great and to excellent. And in a way, every head teacher should have on the wall of his or her office, or in the wall of her or his own mind, a judgment about where the school is now and how it might be moved further forward. And so, 10 actions for you, those of you in the room who are school leaders, which you might consider. Maybe developing further, if you haven't already, a school-wide policy for teaching and learning. It cannot be left, research would suggest to us, to individual teachers' discretion. To be based upon an agreed system-wide standards of teaching and learning. Of course, tailored to your particular school context. So again, it's an agreed set of standards, not an imposed set of standards. And that it should include clear guidelines for equity and fairness, for differentiation between pupils and indeed between teachers, and high expectations for achievement. And of course, it is you, if you're a head teacher, or the owner of a school, or both, it is you who does have that ultimate responsibility for the formulation, the implementation, and the monitoring and evaluation of the effects of this policy. Of course, you will engage others in this, but it is you who will have the final responsibility. But of course, you need support, both internally and from those outside but connected with your organization. Now, how do you do all these things and still remain sane, and still have your health, and still be resilient, and still be committed, and still be passionate, and so on? You need friends. You need people who will join with you in championing the cause of improvement for the mission of the school. And so you will, of course, as all effective heads do, gather around you. Initially, at the beginning, a small group of people. You can't do it on your own. And then that group will expand and expand and expand. And there are schools where you can go in Spain, where you can go in almost any country in the world, which are good illustrations of this. But you have to be supported through system-wide programs of training and support based upon the establishment of leadership standards. For instance, you will not in this room all be at the same phase of your career or stage of your career. Some of you will have been leading for 10 years, 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Some of you will have gone through patches of when you were poor, when you got better. Hopefully you're all very good now. But you will have had different needs in different phases of your careers. And these needs, like the needs of teachers in different phases of their careers, need to be taken into account. And the programs must focus upon competency development, nurturing moral purpose, and personal and professional qualities associated with this. And finally, I would say, well, I would, wouldn't I, because I work in a university. But finally, I think I would say that they should be established in partnerships with universities in order to provide a national system of accreditation. But let those partnerships be real partnerships and a real exchange of knowledge and experience. And don't let the universities dominate. Experience and practice is far too important than to let theory away from practice dominate. And so, at this time of the day, I've only spotted about 12 yawns in the whole of the audience over the last hour. I think you're all awake. I'm pleased that you've stayed awake, and I hope that some of the things, at least, that I've shared with you today will influence you in some way in your present and future lives in working for the good and the achievement and the well-being of all children and young people. Thank you.
Christopher, come with me to the
Yes, I will.
please. Momento de preguntas.
I hope that wasn't too long.
Sorry.
I hope that wasn't too long.
Sorry.
Was it too long?
No. That's good. Necesitamos un servicio, un traductor para él, creo, que no tiene. Un aparatito. Me siento como un astronauta con tantas cosas.
Which one?
In English? Yes?
Do you have it? Okay.
Yes.
Christopher, yo conozco bastantes directores de colegios. Algunos de ellos tienen una gran capacidad para saber cuál es la visión. Do you hear me?
No. Let's try again.
6. Is anything okay?
Try.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Algunos de los directores de colegios que yo conozco tienen una gran capacidad para determinar la visión, las estrategias, los objetivos, pero les cuesta hacérselos llegar a sus profesores y comunicarlo con eficacia. Otros profesores tienen una gran capacidad de elaborar el diseño curricular, pero les cuesta relacionarse con los padres y hacer ver a la sociedad del entorno que el colegio tiene sentido y cumple una función social. ¿Es importante para los directores de los colegios o para los equipos directivos saber comunicar bien o es una cuestión secundaria?
I heard most of that question, so I'll try and, I didn't hear the first part, but I mostly, yeah. So I'll try to answer that best I can. If you think about, if you do not start from the position where you believe that all teachers are expert at everything, then that's a good place to start. So your example of some teachers may be not good at forming relationships with parents, for instance. Some teachers not good at communicating and so on with other adults. They're examples of where teachers need to learn more about the exercise of those kind of skills and those kind of strategies. Now, why don't they know about them? Why aren't they good at them? Well, there could be all kinds of reasons. And so it's necessary, as I said during my talk, for the head teacher, a good head teacher, will be able to diagnose or assess the needs of the different teachers in relation to the different tasks which they have to carry out. Yeah? Now, it's one thing diagnosing that. Now, so the question is, how do you diagnose? How do head teachers find these things out? Well, they don't find these things out by being distant from their staff. They will only find them out by being skilled communicators themselves, by being skilled listeners themselves. So that's the first point. Teachers are not perfect. No one is perfect. And there are more tasks for teachers to do which they must learn, which some must learn to do better. The second point is, in relation to that question, is that you must encourage through example, as well as through your in-service training and development activities, you must encourage teachers to reflect on their own actions. If a teacher doesn't know they're not very good with parents, then there's nothing they can do about it. So there has to be reflection on the part of the teacher and feedback on the part of the head teacher or on the part of colleagues to those teachers or to that teacher. And the third part of the answer to that question is, for some teachers, it will take time, more time than others, to learn. Other teachers may never be very good at certain tasks of their job outside of the classroom. I hope they'll all be very good inside of the classroom. I can remember a very brief anecdote. An Australian school principal who retired recently. She was principal of a very, very successful school and had helped to sustain the success of that school. But her strength was not in interpersonal or social relations. She was okay, she was competent, but that wasn't her strength. And she said to us herself that her deputy head teacher took the lead in those key matters because her deputy head teacher had particular skills, particular strengths in that particular area. Mm-hmm. So I guess the third part is to say, look, sometimes we have to distribute the tasks and the skills which those tasks demand a little more widely.
¿Quién enseña las estrategias de mejora?
Teachers' improvement strategies.
Sí, ¿quién las enseña? ¿Las establece el propio director o tienen que ser establecidas por el equipo o se establecen desde fuera del equipo?
Good head teachers establish them within the school. Yeah? They establish them not by imposing but by discussing. Maybe they take the final decision. Maybe their smaller leadership team takes the final decision. Yeah? Good head teachers read what's going on outside of their school. They can say, we know because they talk to people, because they read the educational press, because they have networks with other head teachers, they can predict before the law is changed that the law will be changed. They don't wait. They don't wait in order to react. They respond to the gathering of intelligence, we call it. They gather intelligence. And so they are the ones who determine their own future. determine the future of the school. And if they're effective head teachers, they involve their staff as widely as possible in taking decisions which will enable them to determine the future of the school. So that when something comes in from the outside, it doesn't feel like it's being imposed. They measure it against the good practices they have already been developing over the last year, over the last 2 years. And we find this in country after country after country. It's not something which is cultural specific. Head teachers find out. It's part of their job to know what's going on outside the world of the school gates.
Una persona pide detalles, apunta key aspects concretos sobre la carrera profesional del docente en relación con el liderazgo en el colegio. Aspectos concretos.
Is the question about how teachers move to becoming leaders? Is that what the meaning is?
Entiendo que sí. Cómo un profesor va desarrollando su carrera profesional y qué aspectos tiene que cuidar para que pueda ser considerado un potencial líder en el centro.
Okay, I understand.
Entiendo que sí.
The important point is if a teacher wishes to develop him or herself so that they can eventually take on leadership roles, there's an essential difference, it's an obvious difference between teaching in the classroom and leadership, or leadership in the classroom, if you like, and leadership outside of the classroom. Leadership inside of the classroom usually is on your own, and it's with a group of children or young people who must be there. So there are particular skills you need. Leadership outside of the classroom, to be a deputy head or a head teacher or with responsibility, requires the leadership of other adults. Right? It requires a different skill set to lead adults than it does to lead children. And so one of the stages towards becoming, if you like, a leader of other adults in the school in one way or another is, of course, to have practice. And what we find is in the effective schools and successful schools is that the school leaders are either responding to requests from teachers who wish to develop into leaders, or they are identifying potential leaders, sometimes both, and they are providing them both with opportunities to learn about, for example, timetabling, as well as interpersonal skills, as well as managing conflict through in-service training and development programs. But more importantly, they're also giving them, within the school, practice at playing a leadership role. It may be leading a task group for a limited period of time to develop one aspect of the curriculum, and then the task group finishes its work. That's a good example, I think, of practicing for leadership.
Tenemos que acabar aquí para cumplir el horario y quiero agradecer en nombre de todos a Christopher Day su intervención y la amabilidad que ha tenido al aceptar la propuesta de escuelas católicas. Tenemos aquí un vino muy especial para nosotros que le vamos a regalar para que se lo tome con sus amigos de Nottingham y con su familia. Pero antes le tenemos que explicar algo sobre la siesta del sur para que usted se lo explique a sus amigos, ¿ok?
Okay.
Por favor, levanten la mano aquellos que habitualmente duermen siesta. Levanten la mano aquellos que habitualmente duermen siesta si hay más de 35 grados. Ya puede explicar a sus amigos de Nottingham que la siesta es un tópico, al menos entre los profesores de las escuelas católicas. Muchas gracias.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Be careful.
not a cliche, it's experience.